Hello, Mooncrafters. Welcome. This is Craft of Moon. Welcome back to the channel. We're diving in again to another episode focusing on the impact of the capture of Maduro. And I realize there's been a lot of information in the news about new things, Greenland, Minnesota, lots of stuff going on with ice and everything. Not going to focus on those things right now. And I realize that Venezuela may be kind of in the back of people's minds at this point with so much of this information out there. But I think there is some incredible, fascinating astrological synchronicities that are worth taking a look at, because I think that we are at a turning point and the critical pivot has happened. And I'm going to be bringing up the charts for Hawaii, China, Russia. We'll reevaluate some of the charts I brought up in the past episodes. You can take a look at those. They're in the playlist. I think there should be a card up at the top of the video that points to where the playlist is going to be if you want to look at any of those other videos. This is a lot of information. It's totally fascinating. Stay tuned. We're going to dive right in. Okay, I have titled this video, this presentation, Hegemon Rising, the Hidden Truth of Venezuela. And really, I think all the videos in this series about Venezuela are really about this hegemonic experience that we're all going through. And I'm going to be talking about why I think that is. And while the United States is definitely making hegemonic steps for themselves, I think that the hegemon as an archetype is what is rising in the world. And we are seeing more and more aggregation of hegemonic power into different places. And so I think while we can definitely see it happening directly with what's going on in the US, it is a global phenomenon that's taking place. And I want to dive into that. The first chart I'm going to be bringing up here, actually, let me let's go ahead and switch over to the chart, is the Kingdom of Hawaii. And let me change the view here so that you can see the chart a little bit bigger. Yeah, you probably want to see the chart more than me anyways right now. The first thing that I think is really important, so the chart that we have up on the screen is the chart for the establishment of the Hawaiian Kingdom. And that's the inner circle that you see. And I've traced the start. I put this chart up here. And I'm going to tell you why I've chosen this chart for the start of the Hawaiian Kingdom. The Battle of Nu'uanu was fought by King Kamehameha I in May of 1795. And that was the decisive battle which King Kamehameha I used to unite the Hawaiian kingdoms under a single kingdom. So that was in May. We don't have an exact date for the start and end of it. In Hawaii, the holiday King Kamehameha Day is on June 11th, but that doesn't actually mark the beginning of the kingdom. What that marks is the celebration that was created, and the justification for that date is that the grandson wanted it to be as far away from his birthday as possible, which was on December 11th. So I don't want to mix up people that might think to use June 11th. I'm using June 1st because the battle took place in May. The Battle of Nu'uanu took place in May. And it's going to take, but after a battle takes place, it's going to take some amount of time, especially back then. It wasn't like, we had instant internet. So it's going to take some amount of time for that to solidify. We think of like it has to gel, like the battle has to kind of die down. There might be little pockets here and there, whatever. Anyway, so I went and looked at it and put it on June 1st, which is the day after the end of May. And I specifically chose this day and this time, not just because it was in the end of May, because it also connects in a very specific way with the overthrow of the Kingdom of Hawaii and with the US chart that did the overthrowing. So I think that there is some relevance to using this chart for the Kingdom of Hawaii. Now, the interesting thing about the Kingdom of Hawaii, and why I think it's specifically relevant for bringing into the analysis that we're talking about right now, is the Kingdom of Hawaii was a globally recognized, established kingdom, recognized by all the countries in the world, Europe, the UK. Everybody recognized Hawaii as an autonomous, independent kingdom that was at war with no one. This was a peaceful nation. There was no bad guy Maduro in charge. There was no dictator crushing the people. This was a peaceful kingdom that was recognized globally as it's an autonomous country, an autonomous kingdom, as a nation in and of its own right. Okay? And I'm not going to get into the full-on back history of Hawaii, which I studied for several years when I was in college, because I went to college in Hawaii. It's a fascinating history. It's an unbelievable representation of what can happen inside a country from the forces within that country, because a lot of the steps for this overthrow were taken by people inside the Kingdom of Hawaii through legislation, which was able to eventually bring about this coup that took place by the United States. It was a regime change that was instigated by the United States and supported by the president at that time, very openly. And this is not controversial. The United States has acknowledged this and has tried to say, sorry, the acknowledgement of it happened back in 1993. So it's not, I'm not trying to bring up anything controversial here. This is just what's happened. The U.S. went into a sovereign nation and just decided that that nation needed to be part of the United States. That was the Kingdom of Hawaii. We have a history of doing this here in this country. It's just the way things go around here. So I think that this is a very relevant example that we have here. Now, what we're seeing here, and what I want to point out and pay attention to, is the arrow on the screen is pointing out. And I wonder if I can bring up my drawing tools. Maybe not. No, I can't. Anyways, will this drawing tool work? Maybe a laser pointer. Let's see if the laser pointer. I don't know if you can see that. Anyways, there's the arrow right there in the middle of the screen. What it's pointing to is the axis of the nodes of Pluto. And the nodes of Pluto are in Capricorn and Cancer. And the south node of Pluto entered Capricorn on January 11th, 444. So it has been there a while, and it is not going to leave until January of 2741. So it's been there a long time, and it's going to be there a long time. And I think that's significant, being the Capricorn Cancer axis, because it speaks very specifically to the dynamics within many of the nations that are involved in a lot of this hegemonic power struggle that's going on. So this chart is the Kingdom of Hawaii, which puts Capricorn in the 8th house and Cancer in the 2nd house. Now, for those of you that don't know, the 2nd house is the house of resources. So these would be the resources of Hawaii, the resources of the nation, whichever person, if it's a person's chart, it would be the resources of that person. When we think about resources, we're talking money, food. For a nation, it could be the crops and the harvest, the mineral wealth of a country, the oil, the gold, the silver, the steel, the iron in the ground, right? These are the resources that for the country. Then the eighth house represents the wealth of others, or the resources of others. It also represents death. It sometimes people think of it as transformation, but it's really like when we look at the really like basic root fundamental ancient delineations of the eighth house, it was kind of like other people's resources, like the resources of your spouse's family kind of thing. That's the Capricorn Cancer axis is the eighth and second house in the chart of Hawaii. And that is the axis of this Pluto South Node, North Node. For those of you that aren't familiar with what Pluto means, so Pluto, yes, it's the planet out in space, true, but archetypally, the archetype of Pluto that moves through our world, through our cultures and our countries at a pace of around 250 years, the archetype of Pluto moves through our society, through our world, through our culture at that pace. But the nodes of Pluto move much slower. Like I said, they entered Capricorn in the year 444. They leave Capricorn, or the South Node leaves Capricorn in the year 2741. Very long cycle, somewhat akin to the cycle of the precession of the equinoxes, which is representing how the equinox moves at a 26,000 year cycle because of the axis of the Earth. All right, so that's the first thing I kind of wanted to point out was this Pluto axis that goes through Capricorn Cancer. It runs through Hawaii's eighth and second houses, and during the overthrow of Hawaii, we can see this major stellium taking place. This is the stellium of the Sun, Moon, Mercury, and Venus in the sign of Capricorn in the eighth house of Hawaii. Now, I mentioned all the houses, but if we look at the way that Richard Tarnas does astrology, he doesn't even use houses. He uses the aspects between planets. And a lot of what I'm talking about here is dealing with the planets that line up around this nodal axis of Pluto, and the planets that line up around that axis, and the planets that are interacting with the planets that line up around that axis. So I don't know if the houses are specifically relevant, but I have them up here anyways, and we're using them. But I do think that there is something to the idea of the nodes of Pluto being the archetype of transformation, death, resurrection, reincarnation, change. There's a lot to the archetype of Pluto and the nodes of Pluto specifically being represented in all this. So during the overthrow of the Kingdom of Hawaii, so for those of you who don't know about the overthrow of the Kingdom of Hawaii, it was a peaceful overthrow. It was unbelievable. The ruler, the queen at the time, did not have any idea that this was supported by the president, and actually thought that the president of the United States would, change his mind or something. So the troops landed, and they just basically walked up to the palace and imprisoned the queen. I mean, they didn't really imprison her, but I mean, they took over the country just like kind of peacefully. They just said, we're in charge now. And the queen wrote off a letter, and the president wrote back, no, we're taking your country. So it was, that's kind of like a little bit crude and, kind of abbreviated way of talking about it, but it was kind of like that. There was no like bombings, there was no guns involved. It was like they just kind of walked up and took over the country, and everybody was kind of like shocked, like, what's going on here? You're our friends, what are we doing? And I'm saying it like that because in the news, we're talking about Greenland right now. So I just kind of like, I want to like point out that, you know, Hawaii was a friendly nation. So in the overthrow, we have this this alignment here in the 8th and second house axis along the Pluto node axis. I also see, I'm not sure if the next slide shows this as well. I think the next slide is, yeah, let me see if I can see what it is here. Hold on a second. No. Yeah. That's the United States. Yeah. So I didn't draw a circle for it, but we can see that Pluto is also in a conjunction with Neptune at this time, and is lined up here with the planets in the first house in Gemini of the Kingdom of Hawaii. Another thing to note here is the proximity of Mars Jupiter. If we flip over here to the this is this chart of the United States relative to the overthrow of the kingdom. So the outer ring is the time of the overthrow and the inner ring is the United States, whereas this is the inner ring is the Kingdom of Hawaii and the outer ring is the overthrow. So you'll see the signs change a little bit. And here we can see, here we see that this stellium, the sun, moon, Mercury, and Venus in Capricorn at the time of the overthrow is directly opposite the Sun, Jupiter, Venus, Mercury, stellium in Cancer in the Sibley chart of the US. So there's this incredible tension. We're looking at this nodal Plutonian axis. It's remarkable that these planets are lining up along this axis, and that this axis happens to line up in the 8th and 2nd house axis for both of these charts, United States and Hawaii. So really something to think about, there. Then to further our analysis, we can see that at the time of the overthrow of the kingdom, we are going through a new moon. And we know the time, 2:40 p.m. On January 17th. We know the time that this took place. And we can see how tight the conjunction with the moon and the sun is. We are basically at the new moon right at this moment. And that new moon is essentially right on top of the natal placement of Pluto in the US chart. And here is something wild. For those of you who don't know about the 28th degree of Pluto, this is 27 degrees and some odd minutes. I've kind of covered it up so you can't see the amount of minutes. This is the 28th degree of Capricorn. This is the exaltation of Mars. And Mars in the US chart in the 7th house is in the house of open enemies. It's also the house of allies, but it's the house of open enemies. The new moon at the time of the overthrow of Hawaii, the exact conjunction of the moon was right on top of the Lord of Death transformation. And that Lord of Death and transformation is in the exaltation degree of the god or the planet representing the archetype of war itself. And that's all taking place while the transiting Pluto conjunct Neptune, the transiting Neptune, transiting Pluto conjunction is right on top of the natal placement of Uranus in the US chart in the 7th house of open enemies. Unbelievable. I mean, when we see these kinds of alignments that are so perfect within the same degree, or, within orb. A lot of these are within orb, within the same degree, but very tight alignments. And the transiting Saturn, which we can see in Libra at the time, was applying to a conjunction with the inceptional Saturn of the US Sibley chart. And all of that in the 11th house in Libra is opposite to the transiting Mars, which is applying to a conjunction with the transiting Jupiter. These alignments are so tight and are reflective of the houses that are relevant for the topics of war and overthrow and allies and contracts and deception, that it is remarkable that you can have these kinds of alignments take place. It seems like these charts are elected. It seems like an astrologer went out and chose these times to make this happen, but I don't think that was the case. That would be hard to do, but here we are. Those are the alignments. We can see them right there. So that is the United States relative to the overthrow of the Kingdom of Hawaii. Unbelievable. Next, we have the proclamation of the People's Republic of China. Again, we're looking at the involvement of the nodes of Pluto along the 2nd and 8th house axis. Okay, Capricorn, Cancer, again, in the 2nd and 8th houses. These are years apart. These charts are years apart, different times. It's kind of like weird to think that all these things, maybe they were planned. Maybe there was an astrologer that was planning, these charts and lining them all up against the nodes of Pluto. We couldn't have had it for some of them because Pluto hadn't even been discovered yet. So, it's wild to think about some of this stuff. Anyway, so we're highly activating against the nodes of Pluto here. And we can see that the transiting Jupiter for this. So this, what we have in the transiting wheel, the outside wheel, now we're comparing the planets to the overthrow of Venezuela. So we've left behind the Kingdom of Hawaii, and now we're moving into the overthrow of Maduro, the capture of Maduro, as it relates to Venezuela. And the reason why I think this is a significant turning point and why we're talking about Hegemon rising, because Pluto is the archetype of the Hegemon. Pluto is the god of the underworld. Pluto represents the power that cannot be overcome by anyone. No one escapes death. And so the Lord of Death represents the power that is absolute over all of life. So that's why we're looking at this Pluto nodal axis between its north and south node running across Capricorn and Cancer. Capricorn being like I mentioned, the exaltation of Mars. And so this outside ring is the capture of Maduro. The inside ring is the proclamation of the People's Republic of China on January 10th, 1949, Sun in Capricorn. A lot of things happen in January for some strange reason, December and January. I don't know. I'm saying a strange reason, but I think that it's pretty tied to the Capricornian exaltation of Mars, personally. But again, I don't have any historical evidence of that, but astrologically, we see the lineups happening for sure. So so we have before we get into the transits, we have the Sun and Jupiter in Capricorn. And we have, kind of like, you can't see it here, but the transiting Sun and Venus are basically forming a conjunction with Jupiter in that 8th house. The transiting Pluto is applying to the conjunction with the natal Mars. Again, these are the planets of war, death, destruction, overthrow, and activating across this second eighth house axis that contains the nodes of Pluto. So there's some kind of involvement with the chart of China that is connected to the transits of the capture of Maduro. And I think that's important because I don't know how China got its Cancer Capricorn axis to be the second and eighth houses. These were the axis for the Kingdom of Hawaii. And we're going to see, if you don't already know, we think we saw it in the last slide for the US. We can see it in the US that the US also has this Cancer Capricorn axis, except that in the US, Capricorn is in the second house. So Capricorn is representing the resources of the US at this point. Pointing out the Pluto-Mars conjunction that's taking place between the capture of Maduro transits and the proclamation for the People's Republic of China. Looking at the transiting Saturn, making a square with the inceptional chart of the placement for Venus in the People's Republic of China. Saturn is another planet that is highly connected with power and is the ruler of Capricorn. So the ruler of this house, where all this Sun Cazimi stuff is taking place, where the connection with the nodes of Pluto are taking place, the ruler of that house is making a square to a planet in the house of open enemies. So this feels like a very hegemonic expression of the aspects that are taking place in the chart again, but this time with China instead of the US. And I think that as we look at these charts, the US and China, and we're going to look at Russia in a minute, these are the chart significations of the accumulation of hegemonic power. All right. So again, looking at we're staying on China for a little bit. We have the transiting Jupiter in the second house, opposite to the inceptional sun in the eighth house. We have the transiting moon in the second house, directly opposite the inceptional Jupiter in the eighth house of Capricorn, ruled by Saturn in the 10th. We have the transiting Saturn in the 10th. We have the Venus Sun Cazimi, with Venus being in the house of open enemies, and Venus herself ruling the house of hidden enemies. So some really, you just can't make up these conjunctions. It's bizarre to look at these things. So next we have the Constitution of the Russian Federation, and this is the enactment of the Constitution. It was, the referendum was on the 12th of December. The enactment happens on the 25th of December. And here we see the phasal relationship between the Sun and Mars is reflected in the phasal relationship between the Sun and the Mars in the inceptional chart of the Russian government. So we have, again, this connection between the Sun and Mars in Capricorn, between the inceptional chart of Russia and the transiting charts. What is going on with Capricorn and all of these charts? Capricorn is a sign that is a sign of power. It is the most hegemonic of all the signs. It is the domicile of Saturn. It is the exaltation of Mars. It is an earth sign. Earth is an element that is deeply connected to power and the establishment. So really, there is a lot going on here with these charts in Capricorn across time. These charts are at very different times and eras, and they're all lining up with these transiting charts in just mind-blowing synchronicity. Again, Russia against the capture, we have the Russian conjunction of Uranus and Neptune, very close to that south node of Pluto, in an opposition with the transiting Jupiter, very close to the north node of Pluto. And it's in retrograde, so it's actually making an application towards Pluto. Moon also making an application to the north node of Pluto. So again, we've got these really heavy hitting planets. Uranus, the planet of sudden change and innovation, transformation, new things, is connected to Pluto, the power of death, reincarnation, resurrection. Pluto, the planet of delusions and illusions and deception and dreams and all those kinds of things. So this is an incredible opposition as well. Then, not to be outdone, we have a near partile application of the transiting Saturn to the inceptional Pluto by trine. The transiting Saturn in the fourth house of the chart, in the fourth house of the inceptional chart of Russia, in a almost partile, almost exact 26-18 minutes, applying towards Pluto at the inceptional chart in 26 degrees 51 minutes in Scorpio. I think we are going to be analyzing this moment in time against so many other countries' charts for a while. I mean, this is a key pivotal moment where this archetype of the hegemon has been building since 444. So this is not like from 400, the year AD 444, a long time ago. This archetype of the hegemon has been building and accumulating and aggregating and growing. And these different countries, especially the United States, especially China, and especially Russia, have been the recipient of so much of the astrological evolution of the world as it's moved from 444 AD into the 18th, 19th, 20th, and 21st centuries. So, as we've moved into the more modern time, these three countries have received the evolutionary power of the nodal axes of Pluto. And we're seeing that at this point in time, in the beginning of January of 2026, there are all these synchronistic alignments between the transiting planets and the inceptional charts of those three countries that have been the recipient of all this plutonic transformational energy. It's just wild to look at. I would love to get Dr. Tarnas's take on some of this myself, but it's wild to look at. All right, moving on. Okay, this is the chart of Venezuela itself relative to the capture. Now, we'll notice here that for Venezuela, the Plutonian axis of power, Pluto's nodal axis, runs between the ninth and the third houses, which is a different shift. From a house standpoint, we're looking at different topics. And I think this is an interesting, I think this says something interesting about how that Plutonian power is represented in the chart of Venezuela, right? The north node of Pluto is receiving, in the inceptional chart, is receiving an application from the sun. So again, we're seeing the sun heavily involved in the formation of the country as it relates to the node of Pluto, the nodes of Pluto. But this time it's placed in the ninth house of God, of philosophy, of religion, of spirituality, of law and order and judges, and these kinds of more a little bit more high-minded kinds of experiences are taking place here. We're out of that eighth house of death, right? And I don't know what to say about that. Maybe Pluto just doesn't gel with that, or, it will be interesting to see over time how this chart plays into the power dynamics of the Plutonian hegemon in the years to come. But for sure, it has strong lineups. I mean, early in those other videos, I already showed you that there's the moon, sun. So the transiting moon is in a direct alignment, another partile conjunction with the inceptional sun of Venezuela. We can see that the what am I looking at? The Pluto, the Venus, Mercury in the second house is connected to. So these planets have an aversion, a whole sign aversion. So the Hellenistic approach would say there's no visual connection between the planets. However, Mercury is the Lord of Death in the chart of Venus, is in the house of death in the chart of chart of Venezuela, and comes into Capricorn, which in the other charts of the US is a chart of resources and power. So it's almost as if the third house, where for Venezuela's third house is Capricorn, that's like its neighbors, right? So the US's resources are somehow involved in Venezuela's concept of neighbor nations. All right, so moving on. The next we have the US chart. And we looked at this in one of my other videos. Again, take a look at that if you want. But this is something that I didn't mention there. We have Pluto, which I mentioned earlier in this video, in the exaltation degree of Mars. And we see that in the chart of the US, Mars being in the seventh house is in aversion, like I just mentioned, to Pluto. But we say that there's a reception that takes place. So Pluto in the exaltation degree of Mars is in a reception with Mars. And that is a powerful experience to be. It means that Pluto has the full support and the resources of Mars to enact the significations of that planet as it moves throughout the chart from then forward. Also, we can see that the transiting Uranus is in a partile conjunction by trine in an Earth sign with the inceptional placement for that Pluto. And then in a near partile, within 1 degree orb, we have this sextile of the transiting Saturn with the inceptional Pluto. And so we have some pretty significant activations taking place there. Then again, back to this stellium. So we have the Mercury, Venus, Sun, Mars with the south node of Pluto, all opposite to this Sun. And here the moon is not in a partile conjunction. So we don't have it's not an exact, but it is very close. We are within 1 degree and 16 minutes of arc from an exact, and actually both the sun is a half a degree, the disk of the sun is a half a degree, and the disk of the moon is a half a degree. So actually, if we were to think about this, they might actually be in the sky touching. If you were to think about the points where they're touching, could already be in conjunction and connection. It's very close. It's a very tight conjunction that we're seeing here. And to get that level of precision is, it's amazing. Yeah, moving on. Okay, so that's the end of the show. Hopefully that was interesting. I know it was just pointing out the aspects, the configurations. So it wasn't like really trying to interpret, what those mean yet at this point. there's just so many connections, and there's so many synchronicities within those connections. Like I said, I think that it's going to take some time to explore this. We're going through a very radical shift in the US. And so we're seeing the Epstein files are overdue. We've captured Maduro. There's the shootings of ICE. There's the threat to Greenland. Then the budget is going to be reviewed and coming due again. And Congress is threatening to stop funding for different things again and maybe go through a shutdown. There's a lot happening in the news, so it's hard to keep track of it all. And I think all those things are fascinating. I'm not really into a lot of political astrology, but this experience with Venezuela just somehow sunk into me and really made a connection. And I've always been like deeply offended and wounded at the capture of Hawaii. When I first learned about it and studied about it, I was so horrified. And I still am. Like when I talk about it, I just feel this sinking pit in my heart that, it is what it is. But here we are. We keep, as a nation, we keep doing these kinds of shenanigans, and we're back at it with Venezuela. And I think that we're back at it at a point in time that is a critical inflection for the world as it relates to the three major powers of the US, China, and Russia, because of the way that their charts connect with each other. And their charts have connected to different regime changes over time. And I'd be fascinated to look at the other regime change charts, not just Hawaii or Venezuela, but that might be something to come. But I think that we are at a critical inflection point here in January of 2026. Things are changing, and the decisions that are made. I just taught a class on this, on the archetype of Mars. It's with synchronicityuniversity.com. I think there's still time to sign up for the last 4 classes. I've got Jupiter coming up on Wednesday, then Saturn, Pluto, and Uranus. So I'm talking about all these planets that I've been bringing up in these charts. And what I was talking about in that class about Mars is the power of Mars this year because of the Cazimi. The Mars started the year out in its sign of exaltation, and Mars is in direct motion all year long. This point in time is a critical inflection point for the year. And because of its relationship to the charts of the US, China, and Russia, I think a critical inflection point for the hegemonic rising that is taking place globally in terms of how hegemonic power is aggregated, expressed, and used, controlled, and manipulated on the world stage. A lot happening. I don't know what it means. I don't have any predictions, but I'm just finding it fascinating to look at the synchronistic conjunctions. That's it. Until next time, keep your eye on the sky and make a wish upon a star. Oh, and if you're still around watching, please like the video. Please subscribe to the channel. It super motivates me to keep going and to keep working. It's helpful. Write a comment below. Would love to hear what you have to say. Take care.